We finished the last program with Frank Coglan describing how he came to lead the band at the City Trocadero. The Trocadero cost about £350,000. The dance floor was made of tallow wood set in rubber and covered over 14,000 square feet. It had a capacity for 2,000 people. The band appeared on a revolving stage under an acoustic sound shell made of glass, which could be illuminated in many colours by hundreds of concealed lights. The Trocadero had its own kitchens, and Bendroit imported the chefs from the USA. Bendroit's pre-publicity leaflets distributed on trams and trains emphasised SWING, swing music. On 3 April 1936, the Trocadero was opened. A huge crush of people choked traffic on George Street. At 9, Monsieur Francois Stempinski and his silver sextet opened with the Trocadero March, specially composed for the occasion, while the guests arrived. At 9:30, Coglan, immaculate in white tails, led his band into Will Hudson's Cowboy in Manhattan, followed by his own composition, With a Sweet Melody. During the first month, more than 100,000 people attended the Troc. The Trocadero News, a weekly pamphlet, ran a series of articles about the band members. Each afternoon, at the entertainment tea, the band played excerpts from operas and a wide range of light classical music. The band played many commercial favourites in the evening, but because Coglan was wrapped in it, jazz remained a big feature of the program. The ABC won the right to broadcast the band live on 2BL between 7 and 8 p.m. on Thursdays. This is a record of the Frank Coglan Orchestra, recorded on 25 May 1937, playing Darktown Strutter's Ball.
Honey, better be ready round 8:30. Now babe says don't be late once you get there when the band starts playing. Dance off both my shoes when I hear those Jelly Roll blues. Tomorrow night after Darktown Strutter's Ball.
In the brass section at the Trocadero was George Dobson.
And then, of course, comes the big hand-picked band for the Trocadero in Sydney. I think it was probably the finest aggregation and the biggest ensemble of musicians ever to appear together in Australia. If you add up the vocalist and the instrumentalist, there's something like about 25 on the stage.
Yeah.
There's the rhythm boys, there's the rhythm girls, there's a solo girl singer, there's a solo straight singer. There was Jack Coglan, the Ishkabibble singer they used to call him. There was a violin section, there was a saxophone, 4 or 5 piece saxophone section, 4 or 5 piece brass section, 2 pianos, Frank Scott, Stan Vaughan, guitar, drums, or a big band.
Yeah.
Big band.
Did you find that people started to
gather around the bandstand just to look at the band?
Oh, yeah.
Playing?
Oh, yes. See, it was a bit of a show band. We used to do a number called The Music Goes Round and Round. And everybody in the band all had to do something in the way of an individual solo. My contribution was, I used to in those days play a screwy sort of an instrument called the goofer's horn. It was shaped a bit like a saxophone. You played it with a mouthpiece on a rubber tube, and it had a keyboard like about 16 keys of a typewriter. And it sounded a bit like an amplified mouth organ. Not a terribly musical instrument, but a bit of a novelty. I used to play a bit of jazz on that. But one of the highlights for anybody that's interested in this was my old mate John Robertson, who was the great Australian trumpet virtuoso. Robbie played the trumpet with such a least amount of pressure, as usually referred to as a no-pressure player. He used to hold on to a top C on the trumpet while the band romped down below with a few chords as an accompaniment. He used to twist the trumpet around, including the mouthpiece, on his lip for about 16 bars. You know, I don't know of any trumpet player in Australia before or since that has been able to do that. That's what a great method he had of blowing a trumpet.
Yeah, and
Well,
all
look.
the brass band guys used to come in and have a look.
You could see, especially on Friday night when the brass band fellas finished their practice, you could see the different greys and the blue uniforms coming in the front door, and they'd gather around the bandstand there, and they'd say, get Coggy to put on Music Goes Round and Around so we can hear Robbie on the trumpet.
Yeah.
So Coggy would whack on the Music Goes Round and Round, and I used to sit right alongside Robbie, and this was an amazing feat of trumpet playing, really. He used to do it with such great ease because he had a very, very strong diaphragm, and because of the no pressure system, a certain amount of fine spittle spray used to come from his lips, and it used to descend on me. I could feel it coming out of my face as it came out the side of his lips, side of his mouth. Oh, really great. Anyway, that was a good band, and in those days, of course, J.C. Bedroy, a pretty wealthy man, he made sure that the band were dressed up pretty good. We were equipped with 3 different uniforms. For the afternoon matinees, Dutchie and I and Norm Goldie used to walk from the Edinburgh Castle Hotel on the corner of Pitt and Bathurst Street over to the Trocadero and George Street with a morning suit, with the striped pants, the spats, the cravat, the grey vest, and the frock coat. And then for the formal nights we had white tuxedo, and for the less informal nights, public nights, we had just ordinary dinner suit.
Frank Coghlan, Ben Droit's personal choice for leader, was an inspiration for generations of Australian musicians. Ray Price, Merv Atchison, Billy Weston and Charlie Blott recall his influence.
Frank Coghlan, well, as far as we were concerned, was sort of our idol because he had a great swing band, but being such a brilliant trombonist, he played a very good sort of mixed bite trumpet. And his band loved him. He was, he's a lovable guy.
One of the most influential jazz musicians in Australia has always been Frank Coghlan. He has a record for holding the job for the longest number of years for any one firm. I think it was something like 40 years. That's from 1933 to about 1971. He worked for the people that operated the Sydney and Melbourne Trocaderos, and he alternated between the two spots, but for something nearly 30 years he was in the one job. Nearly 40 years in that one job.
Frank came down and took that band over, and I was having a lot of chop trouble, and I was getting that way I could only play 16 bars at once. I went in on first trumpet, and the library was very, very hard. The library was the old American Adians library, and written first trumpet parts up to top F. You know, I'm not talking 1939, when very few people could play that high. And Frank took the band over and realised the problems I was having. And Frank was beautiful and very, very understanding. The way he ran the band, as other guys would have told you, I suppose, he came in and the first rehearsal, you know, we were waiting for the music, he said, let's play the blues. Let's find out who's who. Yeah. And that's what we did. And he sort of found out what we're doing. And Frank always lent more to jazz and precision playing. You know, just to listen to him play the trumpet was beautiful, but I've never heard anyone play the trombone like Frank. in the flesh. I didn't know trombone could sound like that. He could be as rough as guts if it suited him, like what was that guy, Higginbottom? Real roaring trombone, and the same cat would do the Dorsey Song of Menu thing, or whatever. He was one of the few blokes that played ballads in the middle register of the trombone, and waltzes, and it sounded beautiful, because he had soul. And then he could whip it up like hell on the trombone, He was a hell of a player. And I'd never heard anyone play like that. I didn't know anyone could. All the other so-called big names on trombone in Australia just paled significance in my view. There may have been certainly a couple of the symphonic blokes, old Harry Larson and Frank Yon, maybe had more technique than Frank. More than Frank used, I'll put it that way. But I've never heard anyone play jazz like Frank in person. And I guess it was then I got the urge, if a trombone could sound like that, maybe I might like to play one.
I got my break with Frank Coghlan at the Troc in '42, where I really got into...
Here in Melbourne?
Yeah, much to the urging of Elm Stewart, who knew Coggy, had got to know Coggy, used to hang around there, and he said to me one day that Coggy's having trouble with drummers. Oh, Billy Hyde had left there to go to another venue where it was worth more money and all that, and Coggy was having trouble finding drummers to fit in. Of course, he said, I've more or less arranged for me to have an audition, and I was quivering. I said, well, I can't read, how will I go for readings? He said, let's give it a go. He said, these other guys, I think he went through about 3 drummers in 4 weeks or something.
Yeah.
Because Coggy also used to play a lot of the old Dixieland stuff. Anyway, I did this audition, and he ran through a reading number, which happened to be one I knew off by heart. So, and then he said, what about I'll run through a few jazz numbers. So anyway, we did that, and I knew where all the breaks were. Like, Jasmine Blues, Muskrat Ramble, everything like that. That seemed to do the trick. He said, well, you got the job, son. I said, what about the reading? He said, don't worry about that, that'll come, as long as you know where the breaks are in the jazz tunes. And so that's how I sort of kicked on from there, and old Coggy was a very strict man for tempos, and I reckon that always stood me in good stead. At the time he used to frighten the hell out of me, because he'd turn around and snarl and say, you're racing or you're dragging. So I think I learned a bit about timekeeping playing in that band.
This is the Frank Coghlan Orchestra playing Jamboree, recorded in mid-1937.
It's a jamboree. Have your fling, it's a jamboree. Here we go, stepping wide and high. Trumpets blow while we're riding high. Go to town, spread the jam with me. Start to swing, it's a jamboree.
vocalist with the band at this time was Barbara James.
As it turned out, I think I was about the first, if not the first, jazz singer in Sydney, around about that time. The girls were pretty much to the fore in those days. You know, there were bands, girl bands and so forth, around about the 30s. They were very good. There were some very good players amongst them. From a novelty angle, they didn't really keep going. You know, they came and they went sort of thing. There was a writer, I think, in Melbourne who said that the women singers at that time caught on to the American style of singing quicker and easier than the men did. They hadn't anything else to listen to. It was as simple as that. Everything was American in those days. As you know, jazz started really in America, and every recording that we heard, male or female, was American. You see, in those days, if you could do something, you were accepted. The point about music in those days was that if you were interested and you were in the music scene at all, we used to have lots of jam sessions. We'd go to places like the Ginger Jar, and we'd stay there till 3 and 4 o'clock in the morning listening to the boys playing different instruments and jamming away to their heart's content. And if there were any of the girl singers or the boy singers there, they'd be in it too. That's how you sort of got your experience and came into the scene, you know. The Trocadero was the place. It was the only big dance hall in the city area, and all the big balls were held there. The movie ball and the black and white ball and all the charity balls, you know, used to be held there. But on the ordinary nights, the dance nights, the place would be packed, jammed, you know, with kids. As soon as the music started, they'd be out on the floor and jitterbugging all over the place, and they were really good.
Colin Bergeson remembers that Coghlan worked hard to sell the Trocadero band to the public.
I understand that the Trocadero, some nights were given over entirely to jazz, I think.
Well, it wasn't so much jazz, it was more or less a concert from the orchestra. Musical evening sort of thing, but of course Frank Coghlan was that wrapped in jazz, particularly Dixieland, but that was a big feature of it.
Yeah.
But
he also had a small group.
In the group, yes, he had, he picked out the musicians within the group, that was all, which became his jazz group, you know. And he played trumpet, very, very fine jazz trumpet, as well as trombone. And we used to have people just coming in, I think it was on a Thursday night, and just sit down to listen to the orchestra. It was very good. Every week it was pretty well packed out. We used to do a lot of this sort of thing with Frank Coghlan, actions. In fact, we would have a rehearsal just for actions.
Later on at the Trocadero, in the early 40s, was Charles Lees on guitar.
I began studying with Charles Lees,
The New Zealand guitarist.
who was 30 years ahead of his time. He was, I mean, he could play like Django Reinhardt or Charlie Christians, but he had ideas of interrelating keys, of playing in a key which was not the tonic key, in other words, and yet had so many notes relative to that key. In other words, he was sort of Charlie Parker of his time.
And then I fell under the influence there of a man called Charles Lees. He was a tremendous player and had tremendous ears and was way ahead of his time. And this is if people are talking about progressive, that's what they mean. I came very much under Charles' musical influence.
What sort of things was he teaching you?
Well, he wasn't really teaching. We just used to talk and drink. And we used to sit in the back of a buddy's car. I had a friend who owned a couple of Buicks, big Buicks, a hire car. He owned a couple of hire cars. With the help of Charles and I, we drank our way through a couple of Buicks. And we'd just sit in the back or stand drove us around, Charles with his guitar and there with the trumpet and play. Anything. Or perhaps nothing. Charles would just start on playing chord patterns and away we'd go, you know. But we talked a lot. Charles was using chromaticism before anybody else in this country was. He was voicing chords very much the way that they're voiced today, which a lot of people in those days felt wasn't quite right. You were supposed to jam everything up within the octave and one thing, and I did have disagreements with
What, who's taking it over the octave?
Oh, yeah, expanding right up 2 or 3
augmenting it,
chords.
9 11ths and 13ths?
Yeah, sometimes with added notes only when tasteful.
Yeah.
But, you know, spreading chords right out, which of course Beethoven and everybody else have always done. But the dance band of the days, the commercial dance band, everything, you know, the tenor player doubled the first trumpet at the octave, and all that business, you know. All that, of course, is all gone now.
In March 1936, Coghlan was elected president of the Sydney Swing Club, which had been formed on 21 January, and many of the fans who came to listen at the Troc were members of the club. Their fortnightly Sunday evening meetings would be devoted half to records and the rest to a jam session, often with musicians from Coghlan's band sitting in. Coghlan sometimes also took the band up to the Newcastle Swing Music Club. Coghlan managed to keep as many swing numbers as possible on the program. On 13 June 1937, he presented a concert at the Sydney Town Hall which was packed with 3,000 people. The band featured the relaxed saxophone of Harry Danslow, and one segment was devoted entirely to Ellington. The band appeared in a cabaret sequence in the film The Flying Doctor, and as part of the sesquicentenary celebrations in 1938, the band gave a command performance in Canberra. Bearing in mind the popularity and ability of Coghlan's Trocadero Orchestra, it's unbelievable that it was recorded only 16 times, all in 1937, and only 4 of those were jazz tracks. The enthusiasts knew the band was good. Arthur Pearce, a New Zealand radio announcer, came to Sydney in October 1938 and was so impressed with Coghlan's outfit that he organised a private recording session. Colin Burgess knew Arthur Pearce before he came to Australia.
He had a record collection. It completely filled a room, right round the walls and everything else like that. And he had every conceivable band. He would come round and pick me up, take me up there, and he would say, "What would you like to hear tonight? Ellington, Lunsford, Coleman Hawkins, or you name it, he had it."
Well, this is in 1933, and he had what, Negro, black bands, and
every sort you could think of, yeah.
And heavily oriented towards jazz, was it?
Oh yes, yeah. And the result was that he would take me up there. He was that rapt, and he'd come around and pick me up, take me up there, and he'd play these records, because it was a wind-up gramophone thing, you know.
Okay.
And say, for instance, now I said Coleman Hawkins. Well, that's all I'd get all night. And then he would take me from there down to the cabaret, and then I'd sit in the orchestra, and I couldn't play anything straight from there. It was a waltz. Everything had to be ad-libbed. I mean,
like in the style of those other players.
Yes, because
I
was floating, you know. I was absolutely saturated in jazz from this fella, and I'd go down, and I couldn't play a straight melody if you paid me. Everything had to be jazzed up.
Gosh. And this guy, he was working then in the radio station.
No, I think his people had some money, or he had money, and he just used to import these records. And he knew the history of all the musicians and told me all that, of course, everything that happened. Then, later on, he went into radio.
Broadcasting from New Zealand?
From New Zealand, and I know Sydney musicians used to tune into him. You know, they often spoke about him here and all the records that he used to play. Yeah. It was wonderful.
This is the record which Arthur Pearce organised at the private recording session, featuring a small group from within the Frank Coghlan Orchestra, here called the Seven Pearce Arrows, playing Blues in Flat D, late in 1938, with Arthur Pearce on piano and Coghlan on trumpet. Abe Romaine laments the fact that Coghlan was not recorded more often.
It's a pity, real pity. I think that Frank didn't record more or find time during his long musical life to record perhaps more varied styles, because he was a very all-round player, Frank. I mean, I think his number one love was undoubtedly jazz, but he was a strictly commercial man when required, and could lead a big band that was playing dance music, not for the jazz lovers only, you know.
During 1938, Coghlan selected and rehearsed the 14-piece Trocadero all-girl band, which made its debut on 22 August. Mrs. Betty Farrell, who played at the Troc, tells of the involvement of girl bands through to World War II.
This was more an attempt to put a girls' band on as a show band, not so much as a playing concern. It was a stunt. The stand used to turn, they had a revolving bandstand, and the girls' band was brought on for a couple of specialty items during the night. But they weren't actually playing seriously as a dance band, the first Trocadero band. There was another band that was brought in under Dick Freeman during the beginning of World War II, and that was ostensibly to relieve the men musicians, who many of them were working day jobs due to manpower, and we were actually playing half the night and operating on Saturday afternoons as the orchestra. And we were working a 6-night week and 1 matinee.
What sort of music were you playing?
Swing music of the day.
Yeah.
We had many special arrangements, Benny Goodman arrangements, Artie Shaw arrangements, and these were adapted for a fiddle section. We had no brass at all. In Australia, there really were far more women musicians than are realised today, because they were also, after the Trocadero, the Americans were more or less petering out in Sydney, and the British servicemen were coming out. Well, then they opened the British Centre. Well, some of us from the Trocadero went round there and worked 2.5 years again at the British Centre as a full-time band. Then we were also still doing a dinner dance at the Trocadero and broadcasts and all the rest. And we were working in full competition with the men's bands then.
And you have a strong feeling for jazz all through your life?
Oh, absolutely. I started at the age of about 5 when I started listening to my aunt's jazz records.
Your aunt had...
My aunt had them. She didn't really care for it. She just happened to have some jazz records, which I got from her and I still have. Wouldn't part with them. In one sense, I think that Dick Freeman's Trocadero Girls Band, which was the second one that worked for 2.5 years, it was generally agreed by the serious critics and other musicians of that era that the saxophone section, the 5 girls, was the best sax section ever heard in Sydney at that time, as a section.
Jim Davidson's ABC Dance Band was also prominent in the 30s. Jim Davidson spent 1935 with the ABC in Melbourne. When the ABC contract finished, they returned to the Sydney Palais Royal for the 1936 winter season. During their year in Melbourne, the band had grown to 4 reeds, 5 brass, 5 rhythm and 3 vocalists. On 5 October 1936, Davidson's band became the Sydney ABC Dance Band, and Davidson remained its conductor until he enlisted in the war. It was primarily a radio band, though it made a few interstate tours as a stage show, which was unique for the 30s. Initially it used stock arrangements, but Jim Gussie and David Samuels were pressed into doing originals. When the band moved into the ABC's Piccadilly Arcade Studios, Wally Portingale and George Trevere became the new arrangers. Portingale was one of the best arrangers in the country at the time, and his composition, Marmalade, recorded by the band in 1938, was one of the best tracks they made.
He was a very demanding boss, very demanding. He wanted the best of everything from everybody, and he got it. He had a way of extracting the best from people.
This is Marmalade, composed by Wally Portingale, pianist with Jim Davidson's orchestra, recorded in June 1938. Davidson had some of the finest soloists in Australia in his band. In particular, from 1937, Keith Atkinson on reeds, and from 1938, a hot trumpeter named Norm Litt, both of whom could make the band fire. Jim Gussie, the band's first trumpeter, recalls that Davidson always demanded high standards.
Well, he was a pretty strict master. I'll give you the good oil. We had a lot of tussles, as so I suppose everybody else does, but I think I was the most fired, for want of a better word, musician in, well, I'd say in Australia at least. I think he fired me about, well, if it wasn't every week, it was every second week.
Davidson made recordings every year from 1933 to 1941 with substantially the same band members. The records show their gradual assimilation of jazz. 42nd Street and Shuffle Off the Buffalo, made in 1933, were good numbers, but generally the early recordings had a rigid feel about them, partly because it was then a Palais band. 5 years later, the band was on radio and liberated to that extent from the bind of strict tempo dancers. Their performances were now much more relaxed, and the arrangements gave the soloists a chance to fly. Davidson was influenced by American bands.
Most of the coloured orchestras were, they were our guiding light. Cab Calloway, Count Basie was just beginning to pop. I modelled, being a percussionist in those days, I modelled myself on Chick Webb. And we liked very much Fletcher Henderson's scores, but the people seemed to like Jimmy and Tommy Dorsey, Harry James, so we sort of had an easy policy musically.
An example of the Dorsey influence was Annie Laurie, recorded in June 1938, arranged by George Travers and with Alice Smith singing.
The Campbells are coming. The Campbells are coming. The Campbells are coming. But they'll never, while there's heather, swing like Annie Laurie through the rye.
Alice Smith joined the Davidson Band in Melbourne.
So someone said to me, look, there's a band over from Sydney, Jim Davidson, and he's playing at the Palais de Dance in Kilda. And why don't you let him hear you sing? Oh, I thought, I don't want to, I'm all right as I'm going. So anyway, he finally went to the ABC, and they said, look, I'll make a bet that you won't go in there. So I was babysitting at the time, so I said, well, all right, I'll go in. So I took the baby in with me. I walked in, and who should meet me was Jimmy Gussie, and I said, excuse me, are you Jim Davidson? He said, no, Jim Davidson's not in yet. He said, can I do anything for you? I said, oh, no, that's all right. So anyway, I waited for a while, and in came James. He said, what can I do for you, young lady? I said, I'd like you to hear me sing. Oh, he said, would you? So we finally get up to the studio, and he said, what'll you sing? So I remember what I did sing, Learn to Croon, one of Crosby's. So he said, well, come on, Gordon. Would you play Learn to Croon? I said, look, I'll play for myself, thank you. Someone got hold of the baby, held the baby, and I went up to the grand piano and sang. He went into the control room. He said, do you know anything else? I said, oh, yes. So he said, do you know anything else? Yes. So they were yapping. So I thought, oh, thank God that's over. So I got the baby and away I went. I was having dinner that night and the phone rang and it was Davidson. And he said, I'd like you to come into 3LO in the morning at 10 o'clock. I'd like to have a talk with you. I went in there was the contract with Mr. James. He was there. And he said, I'd like to take you to Sydney with me to the ABC over there. I said, I've never been away from home in my life before. So I said, I'll have to ask my father. So I asked my dad, and he said, well, Alice, I think it's a good opportunity for you.
Alice was a wonderful girl, a wonderful vocalist and a perfect musician. Perfect pitch and very versatile girl, Alice.
Davidson's reputation grew large. A readers' poll of the South Australian Radio Call magazine in 1937 voted Davidson's band second most popular behind Jack Hilton's band. The best-selling records for 1938 were Alan Jones first, Davidson's ABC Dance Band from second to fifth places, above Jeanette MacDonald and Nelson Eddy. There was a controversy amongst the fans around Australia as to who had the best band, Davidson or Coghlan. Both were favourites with separate and complementary audiences, Davidson with radio listeners and Coghlan with palais and jam session enthusiasts. Davidson's band became well known through their regular Saturday night program called Tonight We Dance.
It was very difficult the way we used to do it. We used to do it live, 3 hours Saturday night live, straight from the studio, no rehearsal, straight on air, which meant that everybody had to be on their toes. You couldn't afford to have any little deficiencies.
On 1 December 1939, the band gave a concert in Martin Place, Sydney, to aid the war effort. French chalk was put down for dancing, but 9,000 people jammed the place, and police had to order the band to stop at 9:45 p.m. for fear that someone would be crushed. Before the war, the distinction between pop, dance and jazz bands was minimal. No Australian big band could afford to specialise. In this program, we've had a close look at the two most successful Australian big bands of the 30s, those of Frank Coghlan at the Trocadero and Jim Davidson's ABC Dance Band. In the concluding program, we'll take the story up to the Second World War.